best entertainment on the earth. Tune in for Comics with Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. Yeah, there's a lot of videos talking about a particular problem, an issue within the comic industry, something they should probably fix. And I try and give solutions as to what they can do. But, all the same, we're still talking about problems. So I want to talk about something that has gone right, consistently right, for comics for a long time. And in it, I think, is some of the key to its strength. And this may be obvious to you, the reader. It doesn't seem like it's obvious to the company itself. But there's one thing about comics that is wholly unique and a little surprising. And that is that, by and large, and some characters longer, but for the majority of the Marvel and the DC universe, these two giant companies, a lot of their characters, a lot of the IP that you're seeing, has been in existence since the 60s. We're going on 60 years here of these characters, in comics, existing, hundreds upon thousands of stories. And think for a minute, how many entertainment IPs out there have existed for 60 years and are still popular? I mean, James Bond is sort of one of those. I mean, James Bond is popular, certainly nowhere near the volume of material that comics has, just in terms of sheer amount. But James Bond has been around for a long time, and those movies continue to make money. Star Wars, it's coming up on it. About 10 years less than what a lot of the comics have. But Star Wars is still by and large popular, even though certainly there's been a lot of commentary about the recent new trilogy and whether it was good, whether it was bad. But it still managed to rake in a lot of money, and the merchandise still sells. People still find that stuff cool. But by and large, most properties have nowhere near this longevity of life in what they can do. Most properties fizzle out. They become stale. They don't hold interest of generation to generation. They don't last. But comics do, and comics, in addition to just lasting as an interesting kind of concept, these characters continuing to excite people. And so, if they're able to hop over into the movies and generate billions of dollars there. I mean, at some point, you do have to acknowledge that comics, what the big two have created, have long-lasting appeal. And this is something that's gone right for them. The curious part is, how did it go right? What did the companies do in order to make this happen? My feeling is very little, as it turns out, especially in recent years. I think that there's something so powerful about these characters, the archetypes, these superheroes that create kind of incredible, go-to escapist entertainment. There's something so powerful about that even when the companies themselves, suffer, problems, Marvel going bankrupt in the 90s, the characters were able to survive. The interest in this stuff survived. You look at today, and a lot has been said about, oh, look, nobody cares about the big two anymore. They're all going to manga. Well, absolutely, manga is selling well, but the big two are still selling a healthy amount of comics. Not nearly amount as what they did, not even close. But you can't both companies are cash flow positive, and not by a little, by a decent amount. I totally agree they could be doing better. I totally agree they can be doing more. I think that is obvious. But many companies struggle to just stay in business, to not fend off complete bankruptcy, which Marvel had. Most companies don't make it to this point. Whether you like the movies or not, whether you like Captain Marvel or not, they were able to scoop up that property, put a star in it, put a bunch of flashy packaging on it, fold it into the MCU, which has a strong core audience, and get a lot of money off that movie. Certainly profitable. Birds of Prey, the Harley Quinn version, not a great movie, but for me. Sort of a confusing mess. Also hit during parts of COVID. I mean, just kind of at the beginning of that. So it had a lot of things going on with it. Still made money. I don't know. Some people have said it lost money. If you factor in kind of the auxiliary marketing and some of the other pieces, but when you parse everything through with what they were able to merchandise, what they were able to license off, It was probably in the green. It certainly looks like it. Some people have tried to make the case otherwise, but even kind of looking over the numbers over the last weekend, it made money. It didn't make enough money. To be a success, you really need to do 2x. In Hollywood, you're not considered a success, and it didn't do that. But, you know, it speaks to the power of these properties that in the comics, in the movies, they're able to basically recover from disastrous conditions and decisions. Both companies at various times have worked really hard to tank their own property. I mean, you could argue they're doing that now, and yet the character's interest is still high. Apathy has not totally set in, or just it's not a cold property. This stuff is still hot. In fact, in many cases, it's why a lot of the arguments still take place. People really want it to be better. They want to be involved. They want to connect to it. Most people do not want the comics just to burn down. They would like it to be great because they love those characters or they want to engage with them. That's unusual. I think when I think about this, it reminds me of a couple takeaways that the comic industry, and frankly, I used James Bond at the beginning. When the new James Bond movie came out, there was a lot of commentary about how James Bond was an old property. It was not with the times. We've got to change it. James Bond is a a guy who's going around, getting tail and shooting people and drinking. That's nobody in current times wants to watch that, was what people said. Except the numbers suggested the opposite. People still wanted to watch that just fine. But it got in people's heads, we've got to change it. We've got to get in there. We've got to make a difference. Why shouldn't Bond be a African American woman, or I guess not African American, English black woman? Why can't that? It's time. But the customers didn't really seem to suggest it was time. They were fine with the property the way it was. It was continuing to make money. It continued to hold a lot of interest. Comics is going through a lot of the same thing. There's this kind of almost paranoia within the company itself. Like, we've got to change things. We have to. People are getting to Fantastic Four just doesn't work with today's audience. Really? Are you sure? I think it works just fine. Spider-Man, Captain America, I think all these things work fine. That doesn't mean you shouldn't change or adapt things, but people like these characters, and the strength in comics, just like the strength in James Bond, is that it has survived for 5-6 decades. In some cases, Superman, Batman, longer. Unlike a lot of other things, it continues to make money. It continues to hold interest. Why exactly are we so paranoid that we got to get in there and change it? That today's audiences don't want it? It's weird. It's like people are trying to correct the destruction of the brand before it's actually destructed, and thus bring the destruction on themselves. If you're a big fan of James Bond, and you just like watching those movies, once every 4 years or so, when they crank out another one, why do you want it to change? Frankly, what does it say when your children, and in some cases your children's children, also have interest in James Bond, that it's able to hop generations and still make lots of money? People flock to the theaters to see it. Was there some invisible metric out there that was saying, hey, the numbers are failing and people have a lot less interest in this property? We're going to need to get in there and make some radical adjustments because the audience is fleeing? No, there wasn't any. Largely the same thing with comics. If you look at Civil War, if you look at Secret Invasion, even over at Marvel, it was making a ton of money. Marvel was doing quite well during that 2010-2012 period. Did much worse in the late 90s when bankruptcy almost toppled them over. They had climbed up. So what was it in 2012, 2013, 2014 that got people to say, hey, we've got to make some major, Tom Brevoort going, a lot of these properties just don't resonate with kids. Really? I think they do, though. I think they do just fine. But the companies came in there and they forgot the most important lesson that they had, that frankly, these comics are popular. These characters survive generations. They pass the test of time. They work. No, but we've got to get in there and change them because the kids of today aren't going to adapt to it. If we're not seeing enough kids of today adapting to it, is it the problem of the characters or is it the problem of paper because it's a more digital age? Is it a problem of price because $4.99 seems a bit high for a kid coming into the market? Great for the collector; it's been around with you for 30 years, but for kids that's high. Is it really the characters? I don't think so. I think so. One of the things that's gone really right about comics is that these core principles, the core characters, the core of what Marvel and DC and a lot of these comics are all about, have survived for decades with no sign of stopping. Again, the billion-dollar movies is a strong indicator that if you take these comics and you throw them up there with just their core principles, and no matter how whatever scene or that scene inside the Avengers that we want to call woke or whatever you want to do, look, the majority of those movies are straightforward action, very little drama. The one that involved more of kind of these social ideas was the Eternals, which didn't do so well. Now, granted, again, COVID, but the movies are by and large bread and butter superhero action films. They're not. They don't get into a lot of these changes. Now they seem to be starting to. And again, it's like watching a bit of a slow motion car wreck. You're like, but why would you shift and change? People like what you do. They're happy. The only argument here is that we have to change in order to fend off, problems in the future. That we believe very strongly that it's going to get bad, and so we have to get ahead of it. But where is the data showing that? And again, is the problem the characters, the comics, or is it the problem auxiliary things? Is the problem because you have no digital strategy or your pricing is too high? I think it's that. I don't think anybody is sitting around going, man, I'm as a kid, I'm embarrassed to read Spider-Man because that's grandpa stuff. It's old. Out of Peter Parker, that's what my grandfather was into. I can't read Spider-Man. I mean, I don't know. That movie seemed to do pretty well, and that gave us not one but three Peter Parker white dude Supermen. So I think it's fine. Anyway, I think that's something comics has done really right. They've captured the imagination for people for years, for decades, quite well, and that's a strength. Maybe the companies ought to start recognizing that more as a strength. I don't know. I would suggest they do. Thanks for listening.